Chapter 1, The Zero Thinking Directive. The humidity in the Bayport chemical processing plant wasn't just a product of the Texas Gulf Coast. It was the physical weight of a system under duress. I'm Elias Thorne, and for 15 years, I've been the guy who keeps this place from becoming a crater. As a senior safety and systems engineer, my job is 10% math and 90% intuition, knowing exactly which valves are finicky and which sensors have a habit of ghosting. Or at least it was. The shift happened on a Tuesday morning in the mahogany-lined vacuum of the executive boardroom. Marcus Sterling, the new plant director, a man whose skin looked like it had been cured in expensive scotch and whose soul had been replaced by a series of McKinsey spreadsheets, was holding court.
"The numbers are unacceptable," Sterling said, tapping a Montblanc pen against a graph that showed our maintenance costs. "Thorne, you've requested a 3-week shutdown for Reactor 4. Do you have any idea what that does to our quarterly EBITDA?"
I looked at the graph. Then I looked at Marcus. Reactor 4 is currently running on original 1990s PLC logic with seals that were rated for a 10-year lifespan 20 years ago, I said. If we don't replace the gaskets and recode the pressure interlocks, we aren't looking at a shutdown. We're looking at a catastrophe.
Sterling didn't even blink. He looked at the other board members, men who knew as much about chemical engineering as I knew about professional polo, and gave a condescending smirk. "See, this is the problem with experts," Sterling said, the word dripping with vitriol. "They get lost in the weeds. They develop feelings for the machines. They think they're more important than the process." He leaned across the table, his eyes locking onto mine. "Elias, I've read the SOP manual I commissioned. It's a beautiful piece of work, efficient, streamlined. It says Reactor 4 is rated for continuous operation under current loads. I don't pay you to have intuition or to think. I pay you to execute," he said.
The manual you commissioned was written by consultants who have never stepped foot on a factory floor, I replied, my voice remaining a flat, neutral monotone. I was already entering gray rock mode. It ignores the mechanical fatigue of the actual hardware.
"Enough," Sterling snapped. "I'm tired of the pushback. I'm tired of the common-sense excuses for why we can't meet targets. From this moment forward, Thorne, you are to stop thinking. You are to follow the manual exactly as written. No deviations. No engineering judgment. If the book says it's fine, it's fine. Do you understand?"
The room went silent. I felt the weight of the rotten root here. Sterling wasn't just arrogant, he was dangerous. He had rewritten the safety protocols to make the plant look more profitable on paper for his year-end bonus, regardless of the physical reality. He wanted a robot, not an engineer. I looked at him for 5 seconds. I didn't get angry. I didn't argue. I simply reached for my notebook. "I understand, Marcus," I said. "Just to be clear for the record, you are directing me to disregard my professional judgment and follow the internal SOP Manual 4.2 without exception."
Finally, Sterling sighed, leaning back. "Yes, to the letter, don't think. Just follow the manual."
I nodded slowly. I knew that manual. I'd spent my nights highlighting its absurdities. It was a document of pure corporate fantasy. It assumed every sensor was perfectly calibrated and every valve was brand new. It was a house of cards. "I'll begin implementation immediately," I said. Chapter 2, The Paper Trail. The most important rule of malicious compliance isn't the compliance itself, it's the paper trail. Without a written death token, the antagonist will simply gaslight you when the disaster occurs. Marcus Sterling was a man who thrived on verbal commands and plausible deniability. I wasn't going to give him an inch of it. I sat in my cramped office, the hum of the cooling fans the only sound as I drafted the most important email of my career. From Elias Thorne, Senior Systems Engineer, to Marcus Sterling, Plant Director, CC, Human Resources, Legal Department, General Inbox, Regional Operations. Subject, Formal Acknowledgement of New Operational Directive SOP 4.2 Implementation. Marcus, pursuant to our meeting this morning at 09:00, I am writing to formally acknowledge and confirm your direct order. As instructed, I will immediately cease the application of engineering judgment, intuition, or common sense, regarding the maintenance and operation of the Bayport facility. Per your directive, I will transition to a 100% literal execution of the internal SOP Manual 4.2 to ensure there are no misunderstandings during the upcoming high-output cycle. I wish to clarify that this means I will no longer perform the preventative bypasses or manual calibrations that have previously kept the older units operational during sensor fluctuations. We will adhere strictly to the manual's stated thresholds. If I have misunderstood this directive in any way, please respond to this email with corrections before 16:00 today. Otherwise, I will proceed as ordered. Regards, Elias Thorne. I hit send. The CC list was the shield. By including HR and legal, I was making this a matter of record. If Sterling ignored it, he was tacitly agreeing. If he confirmed it, he was legally assuming all liability. For 3 hours, there was silence. I spent that time in the plant, walking the gantry of Reactor 4. I watched the pressure gauges. They were vibrating, a rhythmic shimmy that told me the bearings in the primary pump were nearing their end. Normally, I'd have my team greasing them every 4 hours to limp them along. But SOP 4.2, the manual said the bearings only needed service every 500 operating hours. They were at hour 412. At 15:45, my inbox pinged.
Elias, I don't need a lecture on how to do your job. You have your orders, the email from Sterling Reed. Stop wasting time on clarification emails and start hitting the numbers. Follow the manual and shut up. Marcus.
I felt a cold shiver of satisfaction. Follow the manual and shut up. There it was, the death token. He had even been arrogant enough to reply with the CCs still attached. He thought he was exerting dominance. He was actually signing a confession. I immediately printed 3 copies of the exchange. One went into my briefcase. One went into a locked drawer in my desk. The third I scanned and uploaded to a private, off-site cloud server. Then I walked down to the control room.
The shift-led old man Miller was staring at a flickering monitor. Miller had been at this plant since the Reagan administration. He knew the machines better than he knew his own children. Elias, Miller said, pointing at the screen, flow sensor on pipe 7 is twitching again.
It's reading a 2.1% variance. I was gonna send a kid up there to tap the housing and reset the lead, but I held up a hand. Don't touch it, Miller, I said.
Miller frowned. If we don't reset it, the PLC is gonna think there's a blockage. It'll trigger a level 1 diagnostic. That'll kill the feed for at least 4 hours. What does the manual say, Miller? I asked, my voice as neutral as a dial tone. Miller squinted. The manual says if it hits 2%, we shut down that line and perform a full sensor recalibration. He chuckled, but we haven't done that in 5 years because we know it's just the heat expanding the bracket.
From now on, we do what the manual says, I told him. Director Sterling's orders, no common sense, no intuition. If the book says shut it down, we shut it down.
Miller looked at me, his eyes widening as he saw the absolute lack of emotion on my face. He'd known me a long time. He saw the gray rock in my eyes. You're serious, Miller whispered.
I am a robot, Miller. I just follow the code. Miller looked back at the screen. The variance ticked to 2.2%. He looked at the emergency stop button for pipe 7, a line that fed the main refinery. God help us, Miller said, and he slammed his palm onto the button. Chapter 3, The Audit Ghost. The silver sedan belonged to a man named Arthur Graves. Graves didn't work for the company. He worked for the Department of Labor, specifically as a lead inspector for OSHA. Rumors of an unannounced inspection had been floating through the engineering grapevine for weeks. But seeing Graves step out of that car with a clipboard and a heavy-duty flashlight made it real. In the old days, yesterday, I would have been scrambling. I would have had teams hiding the duct tape fixes, painting over rust, and manually overriding the faulty sensors to make sure the plant looked like a well-oiled machine. But today, I was following the manual. I met Sterling in the lobby. He looked like he'd swallowed a live coal. The alarm from pipe 7 was still echoing through the ventilation shafts, a rhythmic honk-honk-honk that signaled a production loss of roughly $8,000 every 60 seconds.
Thorne, Sterling hissed, grabbing my arm. What the hell is that noise? Why is pipe 7 down? I checked my watch.
Level 1 diagnostic verification, Marcus. Sensor 7B showed a 2.2% variance. Per SOP 4.2, Section 9.1, the line must be purged and the sensor recalibrated by a certified technician, I said.
You know that's just the heat. Sterling roared. Turn it back on. I can't do that, Marcus, I said, my voice calm and steady. To do so would be to use engineering judgment.
You specifically ordered me to stop doing that. If I turn it back on, I am in violation of your direct written order. Before he could respond, Graves walked through the glass doors. He flashed his badge.
Arthur Graves, OSHA, I'm here for a wall-to-wall safety and compliance audit, he said. Sterling's face went from red to a sickly shade of gray. Mr. Graves, we weren't expecting you. I'm Marcus Sterling, plant director. We are actually in the middle of a safety drill. That's what the sirens are. A drill? Graves asked, looking at me. Is that right, engineer? No, sir, I said. Sterling's eyes bored into the side of my head, a silent threat of execution. I ignored it. It's a level 1 diagnostic. We are following the internal SOP manual 4.2 to the letter. Graves raised an eyebrow. Good to hear. Most plants play fast and loose with those sensors. Mind if I see the manual? I handed him a fresh, spiral-bound copy. Page 8, sir. We're being very thorough. Sterling tried to cut in. We'd love to show you around, but perhaps we could start in my office with some coffee, review the high-level safety records. I'll start on the floor, Graves said. I like to see how the book meets the steel.
As we walked onto the factory floor, the atmosphere was surreal. Usually, this place was a beehive of activity. Now, a third of the lines were silent because my team, acting on my new instructions, were flagging every minor discrepancy that we used to common sense our way through.
He stopped at an exit sign over the pressurized chemical storage area. He squinted. Is that light out? One of the 2 bulbs in the exit sign was flickering. It was dim, but the other bulb was bright.
Technically, sir, I said, pulling out my own copy of the manual. SOP 4.2, Section 12.4 states that all emergency egress lighting must maintain a minimum of 5-foot candles of illumination. If a fixture is compromised, the area is considered an unsecured hazard zone.
Graves looked at the manual, then at the light. And what's the protocol for an unsecured hazard zone? Total evacuation and lockdown of the storage sector until the lighting is restored and verified by a safety officer, I replied.
Sterling looked like he was about to have a stroke. The storage sector held the raw materials for the entire plant. If it went into lockdown, the whole facility would starve of fuel within 2 hours. It's 1 bulb, Elias, Sterling whispered, his voice cracking. Just ignore it for 10 minutes.
I looked at Graves, then back at Sterling. I'm sorry, Marcus, I have my orders. No deviations, no common sense. Following the manual is my only priority. I turned to the nearest intercom. Attention all personnel. Storage sector is now an unsecured hazard zone. Evacuate immediately. Chapter 4, the first shutdown. The silence that follows a total plant lockdown is heavier than the noise that preceded it. By 2:00 p.m., the Bayport chemical processing plant was effectively a tomb. The giant centrifuges had spun down, the boilers were in safe state, idling, and the loading docks were empty. Marcus Sterling stood in the middle of the control room, surrounded by silent monitors. The cost of this shutdown was currently ticking past the $400,000 mark. By the time the shift ended, it would be over $500,000. Arthur Graves was meticulously comparing our real-time logs with the SOP manual.
He looked up as Sterling slammed his fist onto a console. Thorne, get in here, Sterling screamed. I walked in, my expression a mask of professional boredom. I had a clipboard in my hand and a digital light meter hanging from my neck.
The exit light is fixed, I said. Maintenance replaced the bulb. However, per Section 12.4.2 of the manual you commissioned, we now require a system-wide egress validation before we can reoccupy the sector. That involves testing every single exit sign in the 4-block radius. It should take about 6 hours. Sterling's eyes were bloodshot. He looked at Graves, then leaned in close to me, his voice a low, vibrating growl.
You are doing this on purpose. You're trying to tank my numbers because I wouldn't give you that shutdown for Reactor 4. I am following your orders, Marcus, I said.
You told me in front of the board and in a CC'd email to legal and HR that I was to stop thinking and follow the manual. I am doing exactly that. If the manual is causing a shutdown, perhaps the manual was poorly written.
I'll fire you, Sterling hissed. I'll have you out of here for sabotage. Sabotage. I raised my eyebrows. For following the company's own safety protocols during a federal audit. I don't think HR would see it that way.
And I'm sure Mr. Graves here would find it very interesting if a senior engineer was terminated for adhering to safety regulations. Graves didn't look up from his papers, but he spoke clearly. He's right, Mr. Sterling.
Any retaliatory action taken against an employee for safety compliance during an active audit is a direct violation of Section 11C of the OSH Act. It's a fast track to a federal injunction and personal liability for the director, Graves said.
Sterling's jaw worked, but no words came out. He was trapped. He had built a cage out of efficiency and compliance, and I had simply locked the door from the inside. I left the control room and headed to the break room. I needed a coffee, but more importantly, I needed to check the social front of my plan. Old man Miller was there, looking at his phone. The plant's internal Slack channel was exploding. The workers weren't stupid. They knew Sterling was a hack, and they knew I was the one who actually kept them safe.
Elias Miller whispered, "The boys are loving this. They're calling it the Thorn Slowdown. But you gotta be careful. Sterling's a cornered rat. He's gonna try to find a way to blame you for the financial loss."
Let him try, I said. The financial front is where he's weakest. I pulled out my phone and checked an encrypted messaging app. A message from Sarah Vance, a former forensic accountant, was waiting for me. Sarah found it. The elite maintenance group that Sterling hired. They don't exist, Elias.
It's a shell company registered to a PO box in the Caymans. The address is linked to a holding company Sterling's brother-in-law owns. I felt the rotten root tighten. Sterling hadn't just rewritten the manual to be lazy, he'd done it to facilitate a massive embezzlement scheme.
Chapter 5, Recruitment. The man in the high-vis vest was fast, but I knew the shortcuts through the chemical storage mezzanine. I caught up to him near the loading bay of Dock 4. He was clutching a ruggedized laptop case and a stack of what looked like handwritten logbooks. "Leaving so soon?" I asked, stepping out from behind a rack of 55-gallon drums. "The audit's just getting started." The man jumped, his eyes darting toward the exit. He was thin, jittery, and lacked the plant smell, that permanent tang of grease and ozone that clings to everyone who actually works for a living.
"I'm with Elite Maintenance Group," he stammered, "just finishing up some paperwork." "Funny," I said, walking toward him. "I'm the senior systems engineer. I sign off on every contractor's gate pass and work order. I don't remember signing yours." "Sterling handled it," the man said, trying to push past me. "Direct contract." "Let me see the logs," I said, reaching for the books. He pulled them away. "Proprietary information. You have to talk to the director."
"I don't think you understand the situation," I said, my voice dropping into that low, forensic tone. "There is a federal OSHA inspector in the control room. If I tell him there is an unauthorized person in a high-hazard zone carrying documentation during a lockdown, he's going to call the marshals."
"You'll be in a windowless room before dinner." The man froze. He looked at the exit, then back at me. I could see the calculation in his eyes. He wasn't a professional criminal. He was a low-level bagman. "I'm just doing what I was told," he whispered.
"So am I replied. "Why don't we go somewhere quiet?" I led him to a small, windowless office. I locked the door and sat across from him. "Your name isn't on any payroll. I'm guessing you're the one who signs the safety certification forms for Marcus Sterling."
The man crumbled. His name was Kevin. He was Sterling's nephew. He'd been paid $3,000 a month to show up once a week, sit in a car, and sign whatever documents Sterling put in front of him. "I didn't know it was illegal," Kevin whimpered. "Marcus said it was just administrative streamlining."
"Kevin, you've been signing off on pressure vessel integrity reports for a plant that handles volatile hydrofluoric acid," I said. "If one of those tanks blows, administrative streamlining becomes negligent homicide. Do you want to go to prison for your uncle?"
I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I'd memorized. "Elias," Sarah Vance's voice came through the speaker. "What's up?" "I have the missing piece, Sarah," I said. "I'm sitting with Kevin. He's got the original logs. the ones that haven't been streamlined for the board. Bring him to the safe house, Sarah said, her voice sharpening with professional excitement. If he has the raw data from the elite maintenance shell, we can map the exact flow of the embezzled funds. We won't just get him fired, we'll get him indicted.
Chapter 6, The Counterattack. By the following morning, the atmosphere at the Bayport chemical processing plant was radioactive. Marcus Sterling wasn't just angry anymore, he was in survival mode. The plant's production for the previous 24 hours was down 42%, and the corporate office in Houston was starting to ask why the optimized facility was currently outperforming a paperweight. I was sitting in the cafeteria, drinking a lukewarm coffee, when two security guards appeared at the door. Behind them stood Sterling, flanked by a woman in a sharp charcoal suit I recognized as Brenda from HR, a woman who existed solely to protect the company's assets from its liabilities.
Elias Thorne, Sterling said, his voice loud enough to carry to every table. Stand up. I didn't stand. I put my coffee down and looked at him. Is there a problem, Marcus? I asked. You are being terminated, effective immediately, for gross misconduct and the intentional sabotage of company operations, Sterling announced. He looked at Brenda, who nodded professionally. Hand over your badge and your company-issued devices. Security will escort you off the premises.
The cafeteria went silent. Old man Miller, sitting 2 tables away, gripped his fork so hard his knuckles turned white. I didn't flinch. This was the Newton's third law phase of the Trident engine. I had struck him with the audit. Now he was striking back with his only remaining weapon, the authority to fire me. Gross misconduct. I asked, my voice remaining perfectly level. Could you be more specific, Marcus? I haven't deviated from my station in 24 hours.
You've used the SOP manual to manufacture a shutdown, Sterling snarled. You've deliberately misinterpreted safety protocols to cause financial damage to this firm.
I have the email you sent me yesterday at 15:45, I said, reaching into my pocket and pulling out a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it slowly. It says, and I quote, "I don't need a lecture on how to do your job. You have your orders. Follow the manual and shut up." It was CC'd to Brenda here and to the legal department.
Brenda's eyes flickered to the paper. She had seen the email, of course, but seeing it held up in a room full of witnesses changed the optics. That directive was about operational efficiency, not grounding the plant. Sterling shouted.
Actually, I said, SOP 4.2, Section 1.1 states that safety is the primary pillar of operational efficiency. By following the safety protocols to the letter, I am, by definition, maximizing the company's long-term efficiency by preventing catastrophic failure. If you are firing me for following your written orders, Marcus, then you aren't firing me for misconduct. You're firing me for compliance. Hand over the badge, Thorne, Sterling said, stepping closer. Now. I'll hand over the badge, I said, standing up. But before I do, I think Brenda should know about the discovery I made this morning. As the senior safety engineer, I have a fiduciary duty to report any material violations of federal law. I've already flagged the Reactor 4 maintenance logs as fraudulent in the company's internal auditing software. Sterling's face went from a vibrant purple to a dull, sickly white. I've also submitted a formal notice to the Department of Labor regarding whistleblower protection. I continued. Under 29 CFR Section 1977.3, it is illegal to terminate an employee for participating in a safety audit or for refusing to perform a task that violates safety standards. If you fire me now, Marcus, you're not just dealing with a disgruntled ex-employee. You're dealing with a federal retaliation lawsuit where the discovery phase will involve every single email, text, and bank statement you've touched in the last 2 years. Brenda stepped forward, her hand touching Sterling's arm. Marcus, a word. Now they retreated to the hallway. I sat back down and took a sip of my coffee. I could see them through the glass partition. Sterling was gesturing wildly, his face contorted in a silent scream. Brenda was shaking her head, her phone already out. She was calling the regional VP. 5 minutes later, they returned. Sterling looked like he had aged a decade. Brenda was the one who spoke. Elias, she said, her voice strained. There has been a misunderstanding. You are not being terminated. You are, however, being placed on paid administrative leave pending a review of operational context. Paid leave, I asked. Does that mean I am prohibited from entering the facility? For 48 hours, yes, she said. Fine, I said, standing up and placing my badge on the table. But I should warn you. Reactor 4 is currently at hour 415 of its 500-hour bearing cycle. Per SOP 4.2, if a certified safety engineer isn't on site to sign off on the hourly vibration logs, the system must trigger an automatic pressure dump. Since you're sending me home and Marcus has optimized the other engineers out of the budget, who's going to sign the log at 11:00? I checked my watch. It was 10:42. Chapter 7, The Pivot. I didn't go home. I went to a diner 3 blocks away from the plant, sat in a corner booth, and opened my laptop. I was on administrative leave, which in corporate speak meant they were trying to find a legal way to bury me before I buried them. I pulled up the remote mirror of the plant's PLC dashboard. I still had my admin credentials. Brenda hadn't thought to revoke my digital access in the heat of the cafeteria confrontation. I watched the gauges for Reactor 4. The vibration index was climbing. At 11:00 a.m., the system pinged for the mandatory engineer sign-off. I watched as a digital signature was entered into the log. It wasn't mine. It was M. Sterling. You idiot, I whispered. Sterling had just committed a direct violation of the Texas Engineering Practice Act. He wasn't a licensed professional engineer. Signing a safety log for a high-pressure chemical vessel without a license was a criminal offense. I screenshotted the log, time-stamped it, and sent it to Sarah Vance.
Elias, he's desperate, Sarah said when she picked up. He just forged a PE signature on the Reactor 4 logs. I'm sending the data now. Received, she replied. Elias, I just ran the numbers from Kevin's briefcase. It's worse than we thought. Sterling didn't just pocket the maintenance budget. He's been selling recycled gaskets and valves, essentially scrap metal, back to the plant as new through his brother-in-law's company. He's literally building a bomb, Sarah said.
I felt a cold pit in my stomach. I knew the equipment was bad, but I didn't know it was fraudulent. This wasn't just corporate greed. This was a death sentence for the 200 people on my shift. My phone rang. It was Arthur Graves from OSHA.
Thorne, Graves said, I just saw you leave the site. What happened? I'm on administrative leave, Arthur. Marcus Sterling decided that my literal compliance was a threat to his quarterly bonus. He's a fool, Graves said. I'm looking at the maintenance logs he just found. They're too clean, Elias. They look like they were printed this morning. That's because they were, I said. Check the metadata on the printer logs in the director's office.
You'll see a print job from 10:55 a.m. Also, you might want to ask him why he's signing safety logs as a professional engineer when he only has an MBA. There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear Graves scribbling on a notepad. He signed the logs. He signed them at 11:00 a.m. I have the digital mirror. I'll send it to you. Thorne, if what you're saying is true, I have to escalate this to the EPA's Criminal Investigation Division. But I need you to do something for me, Graves said.
I can't trigger a full site seizure without a material threat event. Right now, it's just paperwork fraud. You want a reason to shut him down for good, I said. I want the nuclear option. I need proof that the equipment he's using is physically dangerous.
I looked at the dashboard again. Reactor 4 was holding steady, but only because the pressure dump had been manually overridden by Sterling's account. Arthur, I said, my voice hardening, I can give you a material threat. I'm going to use Sterling's own manual to force the system into a state where it can't be ignored. How? Page 402, I said. There's a section in the manual about atmospheric discharge events. If the system detects a certain combination of chemical imbalance and temperature, it triggers an automatic, unstoppable purge of the primary tanks. Sterling thought it was a worst-case clause that would never happen, and you're going to make it happen. I'm not going to make anything happen, I said. I'm just going to stop thinking. I'm going to let the machine do exactly what the manual says it should do when it's being abused. I'll be at the diner. Call me when the sirens start. Chapter 8, The Bait. The logic of a high-pressure chemical plant is cold and unforgiving. It doesn't care about corporate strategy or quarterly targets. It only cares about the laws of thermodynamics. Marcus Sterling had spent his career manipulating people. He thought he could manipulate the machines, too. From my diner booth, I watched the live telemetry of Reactor 4. The vibration sensors were screaming in red on my screen. The scrap metal bearings Sterling had installed were disintegrating, turning the primary pump into a giant, high-speed grater. Under normal circumstances, under the common sense protocol, I would have remotely killed the power 5 minutes ago. I would have sacrificed the $3 million of product to save the $50 million reactor and the lives of the workers nearby. But Sterling had signed the override. He had taken physical and legal control of the system. He was currently in the control room, probably shouting at the shift lead to keep it running until the audit is over. I pulled up the manual on my screen. SOP 4.2, page 402, Emergency Atmospheric Discharge Protocols. The clause stated, in the event of a sustained vibration variance exceeding 5 ms in conjunction with a pressure override, the system must conclude that a catastrophic breach is imminent. To prevent a ground-level explosion, the system will execute an atmospheric discharge of all non-toxic vapor pressure. In layman's terms, the reactor would scream like a jet engine and vent 5 tons of harmless, but terrifyingly loud, steam and nitrogen directly into the Texas sky. It was designed to be the ultimate look at me flair for emergency services. Sterling had included it because it looked good to the environmental board. He never thought anyone would actually let a reactor get that hot. At 11:30 a.m., the vibration hit 5.1 ms. I didn't move. I didn't type a single command. I simply watched the system-ready light on my dashboard turn to a blinking, awaiting verification. The machine was asking, "Are you sure?" The manual said I shouldn't be thinking. The manual said the system was self-optimizing. I closed my laptop. 3 seconds later, even from 3 blocks away, I heard it. It sounded like the world was tearing in half. A roar so deep and powerful it rattled the coffee cups on the diner's counter. I looked out the window. A massive white plume of steam was erupting from the plant's central stack, towering hundreds of feet into the air. It was the signal. It was the material threat. The diners around me stood up, panicked. What was that? Was that an explosion? No, I said, calmly finishing my coffee. That's just the sound of someone following the manual. I walked out to my car. My phone was vibrating off the hook. Sterling, HR, Regional. I ignored them all. I had one call to make. Arthur, I said when Graves picked up. You hear that? I'm standing in the parking lot, Elias. Graves shouted over the roar.
It's deafening. The local police and fire are already on their way. What is this? That is a page 402 atmospheric discharge, I said. The reactor is venting because Marcus Sterling is pushing it past its physical limits while overriding the primary safeties.
He's currently in the control room, Arthur. He's the one holding the override. If you want him, he's holding the smoking gun. I'm going in with the fire marshal, Graves said. Stay close. Chapter 9, Newton's Third Law. The roar of the atmospheric discharge was finally beginning to taper off, replaced by the dissonant choir of sirens. Marcus Sterling was sprinting across the asphalt toward his Mercedes, his expensive suit jacket flapping in the wind, a black leather briefcase gripped in his right hand. He wasn't trying to fix the plant. He was fleeing the scene of the crime. I pulled my truck across the main exit lane, blocking his path. I stepped out, leaning against the door with my arms crossed. I was still in gray rock mode.
Sterling slammed on his brakes, tires shrieking. He threw the car into park and jumped out, his face contorted in a snarl that was more animal than human. "Get out of the way, Thorne," he screamed. "You did this. You sabotaged the controls."
I didn't touch the controls, Marcus, I said, my voice projecting easily in the now quiet air. I've been at the diner for the last hour. You signed the override logs. You were the only one with access. The system did exactly what your manual said it would do.
"You set me up," he swung the briefcase wildly. "That manual, those protocols, they were supposed to be for show. Physics doesn't care about the show, Marcus," I said, "and neither does Arthur Graves."
Sterling looked over his shoulder. Graves was walking toward us, flanked by 2 men in windbreakers that said EPA CID, Environmental Protection Agency, Criminal Investigation Division. Marcus Sterling, the lead agent called out. "We need you to put the briefcase down and step away from the vehicle." Sterling looked at me, then at the agents. He was a cornered rat, and like any narcissist facing the end of his delusion, he chose the most desperate path. He didn't put the briefcase down. He threw it into the back seat and dived into the driver's side, reaching for the ignition. He intended to ram my truck, but Sterling didn't understand machines. He didn't realize that when a plant undergoes an emergency atmospheric discharge, the site's electronic gates undergo a fail-safe lockdown. The gates weren't just closed, they were physically deadbolted by the security system. He floored it. The Mercedes roared, the tires smoking as he slammed into the side of my heavy-duty F-250. The impact was loud, metal groaning and glass shattering, but my truck barely moved. His front end, however, was crumpled like a tin can, the airbags deployed with a muffled thwack. I walked over to the driver's side window. Sterling was slumped against the white nylon of the airbag, dazed, his nose bleeding. The briefcase had popped open in the backseat, spilling a stack of documents and a handful of encrypted hardware tokens. Arthur Graves and the EPA agents reached the car. They didn't even look at me. They pulled Sterling out of the car and forced him onto the hot asphalt. "Marcus Sterling," the agent said, "your knee in Sterling's back. You're under arrest. You're being charged with violation of the Clean Air Act, wire fraud, and the falsification of federal safety records." "Thorne," Sterling wheezed, his face pressed against the gravel. I'll have your license. I'll destroy you." "My license is fine, Marcus," I said, looking down at him. "I followed the manual, exactly as written. No deviations, no common sense, just like you wanted." Brenda from HR appeared at the edge of the crowd. She looked at the wreckage of the car, then at the handcuffs on the director's wrists. "Elias," she stammered, we need to get the plant back online. The regional VP is on the phone. He wants to know who's in charge." I looked at the smoking stack of the plant, then back at her. "The manual says that in the event of a director's absence during a Level 4 event, the senior engineer assumes operational control," I said. "But I'm on administrative leave, remember." Brenda didn't hesitate. "The leave is rescinded, effective 10 seconds ago. Please, Elias, stop the bleeding." I reached out my hand. "I'm going to need the keys to the director's safe, and a direct line to the Treasury Department." Chapter 10, The Nuclear Option. With Marcus Sterling in the back of a federal cruiser, the cold justice phase had ended and the cleanup had begun. But as the anonymous email suggested, the $8 million in maintenance embezzlement was just the tip of a very dirty iceberg. I was back in the control room, the master of a silent empire. Arthur Graves was sitting next to me, a cup of scorched coffee in his hand. Federal agents were currently boxing up every hard drive and paper file in Sterling's office.
"You okay, Thorne?" Graves asked. "I will be once I see the bottom of this," I said. I pulled up the redundancy fund the anonymous email had mentioned. Under Sterling's tenure, the company had established a redundancy and emergency reserve.
On paper, it was a $20 million insurance pool meant to cover the plant in case of a natural disaster. In reality, it was a massive money laundering funnel. Sterling wasn't just stealing maintenance money. He was using the plant as a transit point for gray market chemicals, hazardous materials that were supposed to be destroyed, but were instead being diverted and sold to unregulated factories overseas. The atmospheric discharge I had triggered hadn't just been a safety event. It had been a chemical anomaly. The EPA agents had already taken samples of the steam. Elias, one of the CID agents, said, stepping into the room, "We just ran the mass spec on the discharge residue. There are traces of dimethyl sulfate in the plume. That shouldn't be anywhere near reactor 4. I felt the blood drain from my face. Dimethyl sulfate was a potent alkylating agent, highly toxic, highly regulated, and extremely expensive to dispose of. He was using the reactor as a temporary storage vessel for illegal waste," I whispered. "He was charging companies to dispose of it, then just dumping it into our primary tanks, hoping it would be diluted by the regular product."
"And when you triggered the purge," Graves said, his voice grim, "you sent a cloud of it into the atmosphere." "The manual," I said, a sudden realization hitting me. He wrote the page 402 purge protocol specifically as a get-out-of-jail-free card.
If he ever got caught with the illegal chemicals in the tanks, he could just trigger a safety purge, claim it was a mechanical failure, and the evidence would be literally evaporated into the sky. But he didn't trigger it, the agent said. You did, by following his manual. And because I did it during an active audit, I added, you were there to catch the residue. He didn't have time to scrub the sensors. This was the nuclear option in its purest form. Sterling's own safety manual had become the precise mechanism of his exposure. I turned back to the dashboard. I could see the hidden subroutines now. Sterling had installed a ghost logic in the PLC that bypassed the toxic gas alarms. It was a digital masterpiece of corruption. I can give you the whole network, I told the agents. Every company that paid him to dump their waste, every offshore account. It's all buried in the redundancy fund metadata. Why didn't you find this before? The agent asked. Because I was thinking, I said. I was too busy trying to keep the machines running to look at the books. It wasn't until I stopped using my brain and started following his optimized manual that the gaps became visible. The manual was a map of his crimes. All I had to do was follow the trail. Chapter 11, The Raid. The atmospheric discharge had been the flare. The federal raid was the inevitable fire that followed. By 0800 the next morning, the Bayport chemical processing plant didn't look like a place of business. It looked like a crime scene in the middle of a war zone. Black SUVs with FBI and IRSCI lettering were parked in a neat, intimidating line outside the administration building. Inside, the elite maintenance group shell company, the one Sterling thought was his invisible safety net, was being dismantled bit by forensic accountants. I was in the server room with Sarah Vance.
She had been reinstated as a special consultant by the regional board at 0600, a move designed to distance the corporation from Sterling's radioactive legacy as quickly as possible. Look at this, Elias, Sarah said, pointing to a series of encrypted transfers. Sterling wasn't just pocketing the maintenance budget. He was using the maintenance escrow to hedge against bad investments he made in high-frequency trading. When the market dipped last month, he didn't have the cash to buy the real gaskets, she explained.
That's why he bought the scrap metal through his brother-in-law. He gambled the safety of Reactor 4 on a stock market dip, I said, my voice cold. Worse, Sarah replied. He used the plant's operational budget as collateral.
If the plant had shut down for the 3-week maintenance cycle you requested, the bank would have called the loan. He needed the plant to keep running, even if it was a ticking time bomb, just to keep himself out of personal bankruptcy.
The door to the server room swung open. It was Arthur Graves from OSHA, accompanied by a woman in a dark suit who identified herself as Special Agent Miller from the FBI's white-collar crime division. Thorne, Agent Miller said, nodding to me. We've finished the preliminary sweep of Sterling's home office. We found the second ledger Kevin mentioned. It confirms everything. We have documented proof of over $12 million in diverted funds over a 3-year period. What about the illegal chemical dumping? I asked. Graves spoke up, his face grim. The EPA mass spec confirmed dimethyl sulfate residue in the vent stack. They're tracing the origin now.
It looks like Sterling was accepting off-book disposal contracts from 3 different manufacturing firms in the valley. He'd bring the tankers in at 2:00 a.m., dump the waste into our feedstocks, and bill the companies under a fake environmental consultancy, Graves said.
We walked out to the main lobby just as Marcus Sterling was being led out of his office. He wasn't the polished, scotch-cured executive from the boardroom anymore. He was disheveled, his wrists bound by plastic zip ties. He saw me standing there and stopped.
You think you're a hero, Thorne, he spat, his voice cracking. You're just a glorified janitor. You broke this plant. You cost this town 200 jobs. The plant was already broken, Marcus, I said, my gray rock mask firmly in place.
I just stopped pretending it wasn't. And as for the jobs, the regional board just authorized a full-scale reconstruction. We're going to do the 3-week maintenance I asked for. Only now it's going to take 6 months.
The company is footing the bill because you voided our insurance by falsifying the logs. I'll have you in court for years. Sterling screamed as the agents began to move him toward the door.
I'll tie you up in so much litigation you'll wish you'd never seen a manual. Agent Miller leaned in, her voice quiet but lethal. Mr. Sterling, the Treasury Department just froze your offshore accounts. You don't have enough money left to hire a public defender. Chapter 12, Scorched Earth. The regional vice president, a man named Henderson whose smile was as synthetic as the chemicals we processed, pushed a leather-bound folder across the boardroom table. Elias, Henderson said, leaning in with practiced sincerity. What you did was courageous. We've reviewed the logs. You saved this company from a multi-billion-dollar liability. We want to reward that. Regional Safety Director. A threefold salary increase, stock options, a corner office in Houston. I didn't open the folder. And in exchange, I asked. In exchange, we need you to lead the internal narrative team, Henderson said. Marcus Sterling was a rogue actor. He acted alone. He deceived the board. We need your signature on a statement confirming that the board of directors had no visibility into the maintenance deferrals or the redundancy fund. If I sign that, I'm committing perjury, Henderson, I said. I sent 3 emails to the regional safety liaison over the last 18 months flagging the reactor 4 vibration variances. Those emails were ignored. Henderson's smile didn't falter, but his eyes went cold. Those emails, well, they seem to have been lost in a server migration. If you sign this, we can ensure that your career remains on an upward trajectory. If you don't, well, the reconstruction of Bayport is going to be very expensive. We might have to find efficiencies in our engineering department, Henderson threatened. I didn't just follow Marcus's manual, Henderson, I said. I followed the corporate manual. Specifically, the whistleblower and ethics protocol that you yourself signed into effect. I pulled a small USB drive from my pocket and placed it on top of the leather folder. On this drive is a complete archive of every email I sent to the regional liaison, I said. I didn't just send them to the company server. I BCC'd them to a private, time-stamped legal vault. I also have the read receipts showing they were opened by your office. Henderson's face paled. I'm not interested in your discretionary silence contract, I continued. And I'm not interested in being regional safety director if it means babysitting a board that considers safety an efficiency problem. I've already spoken with the FBI's white-collar team. They are very interested in why the board ignored 18 months of warnings. You're destroying the company, Elias, Henderson whispered. Thousands of families depend on these plants. No, I said, standing up. You destroyed the company when you prioritized a bonus over a gasket. I'm just the guy providing the autopsy. 6 months later, the Bayport plant was finally back online. It had been stripped down to the concrete and rebuilt with state-of-the-art sensors and real gaskets. Marcus Sterling was currently serving a 7-year sentence in a federal correctional facility. Henderson and 2 other board members had retired early to avoid criminal indictments. I sat in my new office downtown, Thorn Systems Integrity. I had more clients than I could handle. My phone buzzed with a message from Miller.
First shift just finished. 0 variances. Everything is green. We're actually thinking down here, Elias. It feels good. I smiled and picked up a pen. The first page of my new manual had 1 sentence. If the machine tells you it's dying, believe it. Your job is to listen.
The cold justice, Masterclass, systemic warfare, and the manual mandate. The destruction of Marcus Sterling was not a result of luck or emotional outbursts. It was a forensic execution of the system as a weapon. At the core is the rotten root principle. Every cold justice saga has one, the core illegality hidden behind authority. Sterling used efficiency as a cover for embezzlement. By following the manual literally, Elias exposed the physical and financial impossibility of that regime. First, the death token. Elias did not attack until he had a written mandate. By forcing Sterling to override professional caution in writing, Sterling legally assumed all liability. Lesson: never argue vertically, document vertically. Second, the Gray Rock Protocol. By remaining calm and responding only with data, Elias forced Sterling to become erratic and aggressive. In front of inspectors, the man shouting is the one who looks guilty. Lesson: emotion is a data leak. Silence is an encrypted wall. Third, strategic literalism. Most flawed systems rely on the common sense of subordinates. By executing flawed orders exactly as written, Elias removed the human buffer and allowed the system to crash under its own poorly written rules. Finally, the Trident expansion engine. Elias attacked on 3 simultaneous fronts: professional, financial, and social. A single-vector attack is a duel. A multi-vector attack is an encirclement. The takeaway? In any system, the person who understands the rules of operation better than the person who holds the title of power will always win the long game. Know the manual, log the deviations, and wait for the hubris. Justice is about a man who refuses to look away.